All right, good afternoon, class. I'm going to get right back at it. Just left class and we were talking about the Byzantine Empire and how it demonstrates some of the power of universalizing religions and the role that they play. Essentially because the Byzantine Empire in different ways is going to find that unlike the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire before it, the Byzantine Empire is going to find itself increasingly in something of a competition for the power and authority that comes with this new universalizing religion of Christianity. So I'm going to click through here because I definitely don't want to get stuck rehashing things that I already talked about in class. But we left off talking, I was talking a little bit about some of the accomplishments of Justinian, who was a very early and important ruler in the history of Byzantium, particularly after it leaves, it is no longer sharing power with the Western Roman Empire. So there were some important strides or advancements made in terms of the legal scholarship and understanding, where Justinian took some of the best and most important legal contributions of the Western Roman Empire. He's going to rebuild the city. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And also on the realm of foreign policy, he makes a pretty good initial effort to try to reclaim much of the lost western portion of the Roman Empire. But we'll see that that is actually a short-lived accomplishment. Okay, so here we are in Constantinople. These are some pictures. Actually, on the right, we have the Hagia Sophia, sometimes pronounced Hagia Sophia, but the Hagia Sophia is one of the most important churches in the history of the world. It was built under Justinian and is one of the most famous and astonishing pieces of architecture. Somewhat, well, I won't say surprisingly, but when the Ottoman Turks finally conquer Constantinople in 1453 and rename it Istanbul, they will convert this church, the Hagia Sophia, into a mosque. And so the picture that you're seeing down below is actually a sort of modern glimpse of what the interior of the Hagia Sophia looks like, although it was once a Christian church and today it is a mosque. So fascinating story there as well. In 532, really early on in Justinian's reign, which begins in 527, as I mentioned briefly in class, Justinian and Theodora find themselves very unpopular, and part of the unpopularity that they're experiencing is due to some of the frustrations that citizens of Constantinople are feeling in the early going of Justinian's reign. Anyway, these frustrations, some involving taxes, some involving a decline in the standard of living that some Byzantine, large segments of the Byzantine population are experiencing, spill over in a very public and powerful show of frustration and unrest. This becomes known as the Nika Revolt. Nika, which might not surprise you because you know the name or the term Nike, means victory. And so the Nika Revolt receives its name because this is what the people of Constantinople were shouting. And they were shouting it largely as a show of frustration with life as it was in 532. Justinian, as I mentioned in class, almost escaped and left Constantinople, almost abdicated his responsibilities as emperor. But as the story goes, Theodora, his powerful and controversial wife, leaned very heavily on Justinian, and the story goes that he decided to stick it out, and the rest is history. He was able to weather that storm. And after Constantinople was largely destroyed in this internal uprising, Justinian used this as an opportunity to rebuild the city. And so the tragedy of 532 is going to be transformed somewhat into an opportunity to rebuild, and Justinian uses this as an opportunity to build this beautiful church, the Hagia Sophia. He builds the Hippodrome, several other public works that really leave his stamp upon Constantinople, and this will become a fortress and a strong, heavily fortified city that will withstand the next almost 1,000 years of experience. And an important part of Byzantium's lifeblood is going to be that it exists, finds itself right at the Bosporus Straits. You see a picture of the Bosporus Strait here in the background of the Hagia Sophia. And this is really important because the Byzantines are able to control this militarily and commercially significant channel of water, which effectively opens up Mediterranean trade with trade in the Black Sea. Also is a Constantinople is also a terminal for various parts of the Silk Road network. So Constantinople is going to get quite wealthy, and the Byzantine Empire is going to get quite wealthy, largely from its strategic location trade. And you'll see here, this the port role that is played by Constantinople links it up with very important trade regions of the known world at that time. And of course, this prosperity allows for Justinian to invest rather heavily in public works and to create a truly glorious, magnificent civilization in Eastern Rome, or in Byzantium. Royal Palace, the Hagia Sophia, which I've already mentioned, the Hippodrome, other churches found in and around Constantinople. Justinian invests in this and sees this as very important to his success as a leader. Sadly, in the midst of this early reconstruction, or maybe just after these reconstruction efforts get underway, the Eastern Roman Empire is going to be hit by an awful disease epidemic, the plague. And the plague is a fairly imprecise term, but it's probably an appropriate term for us to use, because back then, when outbreaks like this occurred, the people had insufficient understanding to know what was actually happening. And of course, lots of superstitious or religious explanations were often employed to explain the hardships and pain and discomfort that people were feeling. In fact, we didn't even know until the late 19th century specifically what caused, what the disease vectors were that caused the plague. And certainly this won't be the only wave of epidemics in world history. In the mid-14th century, even more important or more significant epidemic of the bubonic plague will strike Central Europe in 1347. So anyway, the plague arrives and has tremendous consequences for Byzantium. Briefly, the plague has two separate expressions. One is the bubonic form of the plague, and the bubonic form refers to the bubos, or these lymph nodes, swollen lymph nodes that form within the person afflicted by the plague. And this is bad, it's very uncomfortable, it's painful, but it's actually not quite as deadly as the second form, the pneumonic form of the plague. And the pneumonic form is when the plague becomes internalized to one's respiratory system, such that when they cough or sneeze, they are spreading the plague pneumonically. And this particular form of transfer is almost always deadly. The early observers of the plague, or those people who commented on the plague, noted that it often proceeded from the coast, so from the ports along the coast of the Mediterranean or the Black Sea, into the interior. So that was actually kind of a useful observation, but not knowing what was actually happening within the people who were infected with the plague, that didn't necessarily help out all that much. Of course, now we know that the plague was caused by infected rodents. Actually, it was the fleas that had bit an infected rodent, and then the fleas would bite people, and having already taken blood from an infected rodent, they were effectively exchanging that, it's called Yersinia pestis, which is the actual pathogen that would then be contaminated or spread to human blood and then infect the lymph systems of humans. It was a dramatic killer. You can see here that the city of Constantinople witnessed well over a third of its population. Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire as a whole, lost about a quarter of its population. And not to relent, the plague not only struck in 542, but it struck as many as 15 times in the next 200 or so years. So the plague became a very devastating feature of life within Byzantium. There will be, fortunately, some recovery by the late 8th century when these waves of plague cease and don't come back for several centuries. But the plague was a very dramatic and painful moment in the history of the Eastern Roman Empire. I already mentioned in my comments in class that the Eastern Roman Empire tended to be more Greek, whereas the former Western Roman Empire had tended to be more Latin. The Byzantine members of the Byzantine Empire are going to also start to use their simple Christian names as they refer to themselves, and there will be less of an emphasis upon clan names. So if you think about it, the little bit we know about the Roman Empire, you have people like Julius Caesar, and he was a member of the Julii clan. Another example from my students in Ancient World Civ last year were we had Gaius and Marius Gracchi, and they were members of the Gracchi clan. In the Eastern Roman Empire, there will now start to be a preference for just one's Christian first names and not so much an emphasis upon the clan names that were used before. Also, the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, is going to become less centralized. A lot of this has to do with the plague, actually. The devastations of the loss of populations means less tax revenue. It means less people to serve in the military, fewer people to serve as officials in government. And all of this is going to tend to place the authority and the location of power in the it's no longer going to come from the center outward. Power is now going to start to be located in the outskirts of the empire. Another way of thinking this is power and authority will become more local, and that is partly due to the ravages of disease. Also, the economy is going to decline, in part in response to the plague. And what this means is people are going to actually in some ways you can think of it as devolving. They're going to go back from being merchants toward being farmers because they need to now provide more for themselves. The commerce and the economy is becoming less sophisticated, less specialized, and as a result, people need to do more for themselves. And so there's this really sort of odd reverse momentum. It's as if time is marching backwards as far as the economy goes. Furthermore, they will arrange their power into themes or themata, and these are local regional provinces or I'm sorry, little districts whereby government will be carried out. I will stop here in the interest of time.